Um, so Liam, first of all, massive thank you for joining us on Friday. Know how busy you are, and also thank you for meeting earlier in the week. Where we got together for the first time. We're going to cover sustainable digital infrastructure, and I think it's going to be one of those topics of folks that are listening in. I've been thinking about the sort of audience who'd be really interested in this, and from a kind of a business technology point of view, anyone who's sitting over the top of a budget that's got,
Yeah.
their own compute in it, and particularly people who have their own, I suppose there's two elements to it. If you've got your own data centers, you've got, you're incurring the implications of not being efficient yourself directly, but also if you're getting services from someone else, this sort of knowledge couldn't it give you a bit of not ammunition, I don't want to use that sort of word, but it could inform you to having discussions with your provider about what they might be doing in terms of the sustainability agenda. And I know, Leon, when we get into it, there's many facets to this. There's some hard cash benefits and some competitive benefits, and then there's the obvious benefit of the planet's resources, etc. So I was thinking that as that, and then if you've got your own data center, you've got your data center managers and those sorts of team members. Do you think that's a reasonable kind of audience that would be interested in what we're going to cover?
Yes, certainly. I think the topics that are high on the agenda of the data center operators or the co-location operators is generally around power costs, sustainability, and efficiency. One of the things that's in the back of their mind at the moment, and it is a concern, particularly for the industry globally, is skills gap. There's a serious concern that we don't have enough engineers moving into the data center market. Pretty much anyone you meet today that works in the data center industry will tell you that they fell into it by accident. It was a combination of a number of things happening in their career, and it resulted in them becoming data center guys.
Okay, so Leon, on that topic, as you've mentioned it, do you want to give us a bit of a background as to how you have? I'm just wondering whether you're talking a little bit autobiographical in the sense, did you fall into this, or
Yes,
tell us a bit about your background.
Yeah, I essentially fell into it by accident. So I left school at 16-year-old wanting a job, not an education, and I kind of had to make a compromise with my mother before she strangled me. And I went to do an apprenticeship in construction. So I was a joiner up until I was just 21, 22, and I knew the construction industry fairly well. I went to university for a short while to do a HND in building studies, but I didn't particularly enjoy university. I was more hands-on. I like to do by learning by doing, effectively. And whilst I was at university, I was kind of interested in quantity surveying and architecture, and I'd spent the first year doing all of this manually with a pen and a pencil. And then the second year, they said, "Oh, there's this computer software that does everything for you now. So all that you learned last year, you just input it into a computer program." And bear in mind that I went to school when we didn't have computers at school, so I wasn't particularly familiar with them. And I thought to myself, I'm in the wrong industry. And I got a job in sales for an IT services company. And gradually over my career, the server rooms turned into data halls. And with my construction background, I was kind of the person that was made responsible for helping with that project. And of course, as virtualization was the biggest impact on the data center industry. VMware changed the way that we did things, and essentially what we became was large data centers. And from there, I kind of took more of a business development role with most of the organizations I work with, because that's the type of thing I like to do. I like to speak to people. I like to get out into the community, understand what the challenges are, and then give them an engineering solution with the team behind me. And I think most people in the industry will have had have a similar story of how they started to where they are today, and it's kind of an in joke within the industry that we've all fallen into the data center industry by accident.
I love that. I love that background, Leon, and I think it's not the only profession that people fall into. And
Mm.
it's funny, isn't it? When you look backwards, you think, oh, the career everyone has, it's very difficult sometimes to see a plan. And there's just sort of this, what do they say, where preparation meets opportunity, the definition of
Yeah.
luck. And you follow your passion. Just a couple of things you said. I was looking at engineers and what folks thought of engineers, and I came across this fantastic quote, I thought, which is they were talking about the difference between scientists and engineers. They were saying
Okay.
scientists discover, yeah, but engineers create. And I
Yeah.
just I love that kind of and just on the joiner side, I used to make furniture for my
Mm.
dad actually. This is a long time ago, yeah. And I also was at school when computers were. I did a computer studies O level, but other than that, there were no computers around. So, and then one other point, Leon, before we get into some of the topic areas, just for folks, we try and do on the 101 a bit of making sure we can cover off some of the basics as well,
Sure.
so we can carry everyone along with us in the conversation. But you're talking about virtualization, so. For those watching and not quite sure what virtualization is, and you correct me, but my take on it would be it's when the physical machine used to be, one physical machine, one computer. And what virtualization allowed you to do was have one physical machine, but lots of logical machines inside it. So you had this ability to start to logically grow the number of computers. Obviously, they would
Mm.
all share the same physical resources. And then you've got the beginnings of all sorts of tuning and just a whole category of engineering kind of opening up. Is that too simple an explanation,
No, that
Leon?
that that is it's pretty straightforward. Yeah, I mean, what virtualization allowed IT departments to do was better utilize the hardware that they had. So before virtualization, essentially what they used to do was allocate a server to run an application, but they would only probably use about 20 to 30% of that server's capability. And that was hugely inefficient, just to start with. What virtualization allowed them to do was to put multiple applications onto one server. But how that impacted the data center was that the servers needed to be more powerful, better at doing their job, to be able to handle those workloads. So more and more power was being consumed by those hardwares, despite the fact that there was less hardware being utilized. But that meant that we had to change the way that we designed our data centers, our server rooms, and the way we cooled them. They needed to become more efficient. So what happened sort of early 2000s, there was quite a lot of large investments by private organizations, particularly the banks, that would build a huge data center thinking their capacity is going to grow and grow and grow and grow and grow because their business will, and they're going to need big facilities to house their data. But then virtualization said, no, we don't need to do that now. We don't need massive facilities. So what they were left with was an underutilized data center, which was probably at about, at a guess, 20 to 30% full from a real estate perspective. And the rest of it was kind of wasted, which presents a lot of inefficiencies around the data center. But that was when we had to really start to think about design parameters. And then we talk about the scientists. The scientists got involved and they started to think about, how do we create better technologies? And then any engineers went and implemented them and made sure that they worked.
Sure.
So this is, it's an ever, a long road to getting towards efficiency, because we need to change the mindsets of the past. And that
Yes.
involves, understanding new technologies.
Yes. And then, Leon, I suppose we've got virtualization, as you described it, this great way of being as efficient as we can be with resources. But it's a bit like you can jump in I don't have an electric car. I wish I did. But by the way, that's not asking for one if anyone's watching. But not that we'll be that lucky. But it's a bit like if you just jump in an electric car and then drive it, badly. you're not, you can still be on a virtualized machine and waste it. You can
Yes.
buy a load of resource and still not use it. So the tech's there, but there's still a lot of configuration and thinking, isn't there, about, otherwise, otherwise we wouldn't be having this episode, because it would all be kind of self-healing, or, it would be sorting itself out. So there's still, virtualization's this underlying technology, but there's still a lot to it, isn't there, in terms
Yes.
of making it work as efficiently as possible. So at the top of the session, you called out a few areas, and maybe we'll go through those. We can move to different topics as well. But you mentioned co-location, power costs, sustainability, efficiency, and the skills gap. So I'm just looking at the one that draws my eye to it, particularly, I suppose being current with today's challenges, is the power costs.
Yeah.
Because we're all experiencing this at home. I mean, when this video goes off, I should be putting on a woolly hat again. And the cost of fuel is, it was always a very significant proportion of data center costs, wasn't it? But obviously, there's a big input cost. As that's increasing, that's causing a real challenge, to control your power costs. So, do you want to just talk us through, the sort of power cost implications, and the CIO that might be watching this thinking, am I staring down the barrel of a load of price increases, and what could I potentially do about that to mitigate it as much as possible?
Sure. So the operator will always be faced with the challenge of rising power costs. That's something that everybody's experiencing today. And to be honest with you, the feedback from the customers where power price increased for them in their co-location facilities has been it's been received quite well. I've been surprised, actually. Nobody's sort of shouting and screaming at the operators to say, why are my costs going up? Because they understand the situation the world is in. So they're understanding that the data center operator is not trying to make a fast buck out of this. But the data center operator is also changing the way it bills as well. They're looking at different billing models, and those billing models give a bit more transparency around their usage. So with metered equipment in the rack, metered equipment around the sites, it allows the data center operator to say, you may have 5 kilowatts in rack 1 over here, but you're only consuming 4 kilowatts of power about 60% of the time. So we can accurately bill you what you're actually using, rather than one flat fee, which is kind of what's been the model with co-location operators in the past. But that's changing. And that's a good thing for all parties involved, because it helps the data center operator become more efficient in the facility. So it knows where to distribute power, where not to distribute power, and when to do it. And it allows us to be a lot more granular in understanding how we can make our facilities more efficient. And then from the end user perspective, the co-location customer, it is helping them understand, what they're actually using, and is it going to be, should we make a strategic change around our hardware or our setup or our infrastructure to become, make it easier for us to deliver our infrastructure? Do we need to replace our kit with more efficient kit? Do we want to consolidate? And that's giving us a more strategic look. It helps the data center operators are able to help the end users plan their infrastructure. And that's a good thing for the infrastructure. Where I think, sorry,
Lee, I was just a quick interruption there. It's just something I had experience of 2016. So that suddenly seems like a long time ago.
yeah.
And I won't name names, but it was a popular kind of pay-as-you-go cloud provider. And you paid for every minute you had code in existence on the platform. So what we did is this sort of early for me at least, infrastructure as code days. We would put together and I didn't write any element of this script. People much more intelligent than me put this together, but it was basically a script that you could run, and it would create the entire infrastructure that we required
Okay.
inside, an instance. And we would use that, and then when we went home, we'd run another script that just got rid of all of it. And
Right.
so that meant, from a billing point of view, we only paid for using it 9 to 5, which I'm pretty certain these folks weren't kind of set up or expecting that. And I suppose the distinction there is we managed to reduce our billing, but those servers were probably still on. There was probably still power drawing. So I'm just wondering whether you can see anything that would go to that kind of extreme. Let's imagine that the power input costs quadruple in the next 3 years. I honestly, I'm not saying that's a plausible scenario, but imagine they did. Could we get to the point where we would need to kind of go to those sorts of measures where, not only is the customer able to, reduce the use out of hours, but then the data center provider can actually power things off? Because, I seem to remember, Leon, people getting very nervous about switching things off that haven't been switched off for a long time. In the old. I mean,
Um,
I'm not. And can I just say, Leon, I'm not suggesting for a minute any of that applies to your, the data centers you're involved in. But back in the sort of legacy days, there's a few machines, isn't there, that people point at and say that's never been switched off for for the last however many years. What's your thoughts on
yeah.
that? It's a bit extreme, but I'm just wondering whether you think that would be a
No,
thing.
we can do it now. We've got the capability to do it now. So, um, data centers tend to be run by what we call data center infrastructure management software. And that monitors and manages every single aspect of the physical environment within the data center. So we can report at any point on power consumption on a server and what it's actually doing, and recognize trends and inform the end user of that. There's quite a lot of data centers out there that have infrastructure from a customer which is legacy, and those customers don't use it anymore, but it just needs to be available. So we keep that in the data center, but it might not even be powered on. It may only be powered on when they need access to that information. So we can do that. The technology is there to do that. And with artificial intelligence and various other softwares that are right there in the market available to the data center operators, we can go right down to a service level agreement with an end user to say, if you want us to power down server 5 in rack 3 from the hours of 9 p.m. to 7 a.m., then we do have the capability to do that within
That's
the
doable.
SLA. We can automate that as well.
And I suppose, Leon, for the good of everyone, eventually as things work out, if we can separate kind of billing, if the billing, if the, everyone wants to get value, for what they do. So the bills are absolutely, you're getting a great service and you're paying for it. But if you could separate any kind of incentive for the data center operator to, to consume as much power as possible. Do you know what I mean? If you could make that slightly separate, then there would be an incentive on both sides to actually switch things off at night.
Yeah.
I'm coming at it from the kind of the total impact of the sector, because Leon, didn't you say when we met last week that you've got the travel sector, flights, that sort of carbon footprint, but where does the data center industry fit in that kind of hierarchy of folks that have a carbon footprint?
Yeah, it's not far behind, the airplanes and things like that.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to think of a where to put this. Now it's people. There's a misconception that all the power within with around data centers is all to do with the data center. But actually, a lot of the power is through the network, and that comes about when when you are streaming HD Netflix content, or YouTube, or any of the other streaming services that you do. That if we're talking from consumer perspective,
Yeah,
um,
absolutely. Yeah.
that's a massive impact on the power consumption.
So have you, Leon? Have you heard the Netflix blockbusters kind of story?
Yes, I have.
Literally
Yes. Yeah.
on what? Yeah. So it's a classic, isn't it? And for the benefit of folks listening, I think it'd probably be worth just covering that really quickly.
Sure. Yeah.
Because Leon, you're pointing to streaming as being a major source of power consumption.
Mm.
And what folks, it's funny, isn't it, how time moves on, and we're now looking at that. But originally, you used to have to get a film on a video, or then it became a like a disc called a DVD. I
Mm.
can't believe I'm saying this because it's not that long ago, but the concept of actually sort of getting something physical to your house to watch a film is so alien now to us, isn't it?
Yeah.
And what happened was the cost of oil and transport costs were going in this direction. So, literally the cost of postage was increasing because they had to absorb all this sort of transport costs. And at the same time, the cost of the internet and streaming, if you like, was coming down relative to the cost of physical delivery. And there became this point where they sort of crossed over, and then it became economically viable to send movies as a stream rather than as an actual physical disc. So that's part of the kind of the blockbusters. If anyone doesn't know, was you used to go there, didn't you, on a Saturday to pick a movie, and there would only be 3 copies of the best movie, so you kind of grab one and hold on to it,
Yeah.
and there was all sort of interesting jostling going on. I really miss those days, actually.
Well, it's
Yeah, sorry. So you're saying networking? It's not just the machines
yeah.
on, but it's also the volume of stuff that's pushing through the system.
Yes, the volume of traffic that's being transported around the world, and it's about there's an argument to say there's conversations actually being had, should we start limiting what people can actually stream for the benefit of the planet? These are serious conversations that are had at high levels of government and within our industry. Through the Data Center Alliance, and for your viewers' knowledge, I represent the Data Center Alliance, which is the trade association for the UK data center sector. We talk to government. We try and shape, mold agendas and legislation, and we try and support, educate the general public about what the importance of the data centers are, because it is now critical infrastructure. One of my colleagues that's involved with the DCA, Professor Ian Bitterlin, he did a TV program for the BBC, and it was called the Internet's Dirty Secret, if I remember. I think you can find it on the iPlayer, and I'd strongly recommend any of your viewers to go and seek that documentary out. It'll give you a really good overview of what a data center is, what it does, why it's important, and what the challenges they are facing on there.
Brilliant.
It doesn't make the data center industry look good, but as an industry, we're not frightened to say, come and help us get better at it. Because we are essentially a new industry. People don't know much about what the data center industry is all about. So talk to us. One of the things.
Yeah, sorry, go on, Lynn.
One of the things I want to touch on later is one of the dreams I have, and not necessarily the opinion of the Data Center Alliance, but I want to see power companies, renewable power companies, and data center operators collaborating, co-investing in the development of sites, so that we can have a real, true, decentralized, clean grid for my 5-year-old daughter, who's going to be around a lot longer than I am.
That's really interesting. You say that. So in the news, so everyone will know when this went out. But in the news, was it 2-3 days ago? Fusion. They've got more energy came out than they put in. But I've got 2 children. I've got 3 children, but 2 are doing physics at university, and they said that it's a pretty significant moment, Dad, that the fact they got more energy out than they put in for this fusion reaction, which is I don't know if it's going to be in their lifetime or in the grandchildren's lifetime, but it's one of those sort of milestones. Although one of my sons did say that in the equation they didn't include the input power from all the lasers that created
Okay.
the reaction. But that might still, I think it's still very significant where we got to with that.
Certainly. I mean,
Um,
George Freeman was on the news only maybe 2 or 3 months ago, MP for Science, Technology and Innovation.
yeah,
And he was at Oxford University talking about how they'd made a huge step with nuclear fusion and what it's going to look for the future. So much so that he put himself on the TV to talk about this. And that is the future. I do believe it's where we need to be looking at.
yeah, it's funny, isn't it, Leon? Because that announcement a couple of days ago, it's quite a while away from being productionized, put into production. But we might have just witnessed. We might have been the three of us on this call, and everyone listening might have just been alive when one of the biggest
Yeah.
things to ever happen in terms of unlimited energy.
Yeah.
Okay, well that's a great great moment to discuss on our session. Just to back up a bit, and this is going to sound quite kind of I don't know, crass, I suppose, compared to the lofty discussion we just had. So, Leon, you're saying the streaming, the amount of streaming, is potentially causing an issue, and we might restrict that. Does that mean I'm reminded of the sort of the physics law, which is you can't create or destroy energy, although I'm not quite sure how that fits in with what we've just discussed. And so if you're going to, are we saying you can still have the same choice, but we're going to have to revert back to sort of broadcast mechanisms like satellite or does it
Um,
mean actually there's going to be less of this sort of hyper personalized streaming that's going on at the moment? I mean, what's the impact to the consumer if we were to restrict what people
well,
can and can't stream?
that's a really difficult question to answer. And the reason
Yeah.
it's difficult is I'll give you an example. So, maybe a couple of months ago, I was in a pub talking to two young guys about their career, what they want to be, they're finishing university, all the kind of stuff that they want to do. And I was obviously trying to sell them the data center industry, go into that as I always do. And we got to talking about power consumption and the planet and how it's all important that we should keep everything clean. And I started to talk to them and explain to them the impact of social media and streaming and what that means to them, what it actually means to the power consumption of the planet. And I said, do you guys have an iPhone? And they said, yeah. I said, okay. If I was to take that off you for, say, 5 hours a day, how would you feel? And they said, no chance. There's no way we would do it. Now, if I told you that I was going to stop you from streaming Netflix at any time, you're only allowed to stream X amount of data per day, how would you feel about it? You're imposing on my civil rights and all this kind of thing. Now, I said, if I told you that you're the reason that we're using all this power and you're actually the cause of global warming, would you give up your phone and your Netflix then? And they both said, not a chance. So there's an education piece that needs to happen. People don't fully understand the impact of social media from a power consumption. And I have heard a stat maybe a couple of years ago, and I don't know how true this is because I never got it verified. But it was said. I won't say the organization who it was as well, but it's a very influential organization in the data center industry. But just in case the fact isn't wrong, but their representative in a presentation I went to in Manchester said that if you've got 1,000 photos on your iPhone, you're consuming approximately the same amount of power as an American style fridge per year. And that kind of shocked everyone in the audience who were like, really? And then when you try and explain that to those kids that I tried to explain it to, they said, well, I only actually plug it in and charge it overnight. How am I using so much power? And they had to explain to them, it's not about you charging your phone. It's about where the data on your phone is stored and how that is effectively looked after. And
It's really
an education piece needs to happen with the consumer, which doesn't happen enough.
Leon, I think that's fascinating what you've said. I've never heard that before either. But what I'm thinking is that with streaming, instead of you traveling, so the obvious, we talk about the traveling, the miles, and getting in the car, and that kind of analogy. Don't travel, minimize your travel. What you're saying is, if you minimize your travel, but then you're streaming, it's like everyone's coming to you instead of you going to them. But you're still got energy. You haven't. Haven't actually. Well, you could argue that the carbon footprint of driving is worse. It's all relative speaking, but the point is there's no, just the fact that this event is consuming power, and that's
Yes.
that's
Ironic,
part of
isn't
it.
it?
So it is. No, it absolutely is, but it's such an important part of journey to the cloud, and all organizations will have a view of how they want to present themselves online, and the use of social media, and absolutely, you're thinking about when you're running certain tests, if you're just sort of let's just have a look, you're using up some resources that are impacting the planet, so there's a big responsibility there. Well, we're kind of getting into sustainability. I was wondering if out of the sustainability, efficiency, and also the skills gap, those three areas, and we also discussed co-location. Actually, maybe we should do co-location next.
Sure.
Again, to the kind of 101 folks, do you want to just explain what co-location is, and why, just basically why do we have co-location? For folks who are kind of now super interested because of the impact on the climate. Now they're drawing in, thinking, okay, I need to understand this topic.
Sure. So co-location is a data center facility, a building or a hotel that houses IT infrastructure. And it houses the IT infrastructure for customers that don't want it in their own building. The benefit of co-location is that what you're doing is you're taking out the complication or the facilities management of the IT infrastructure into a different building that's designed specifically to cope for them. You'll know if any of your viewers have got their own server room, and you're looking at your power bills, you'll see that will probably be the most, that's the chunk of your power bills is coming from that. It's not from your computers. It'll be coming from the server room. That's where most of your electricity is being consumed. So what organizations like to do, or IT departments like to do, is to put their infrastructure into a dedicated facility that's designed specifically to manage that. And that's a data center. So data centers can be huge facilities, like the hyperscalers that are, 100 megawatt plus, where there's plenty of them around the world. But in the UK, what we're very good at, and I think it's because essentially we're a kind of small land mass. We're very good at what we would describe as independent, smaller operations up to 10 megawatt sites. I like to call them edge sites, just because their location is all about proximity. Where are they, and how do they serve the local business community and the area that they're in? And that allows for a more efficient delivery of services, because the closer you are to the end user, the more efficient the transfer of data is. It's just the way it works. But I'll give you an example. There was a TV advert on very, very long time ago with the chef. It's called Gordon Ramsay. And Gordon Ramsay has got a plate knife, and he's trying to open up a computer. And he's trying to fix the computer. And it was an advert. The point of the advert was to explain to businesses that computing isn't your core business. That's not what you do. Outsource it. That was essentially the message. And that's what we are. We are the facilities for IT, and you outsource it to us. And we manage it because that's what we do. We're experts at it. We know exactly how to do it. And we've been delivering it since data centers have come about. From an end user perspective, there's a due diligence that should always go through when selecting a co-location operator, and that will generally come down to the nature of their business and what they're trying to achieve. You know, there's different types of organizations that don't need a heavy service level agreement. They may just want to put it there and let it go. And then there's others that want to make sure that there is absolutely no risk of any downtime whatsoever. They may look at what we call a tier 4 data center. So there's just no chance that there will ever be downtime. And if there is, you're very unlucky. But I'm always on hand to talk to end users who are looking to a co-location or a cloud provision, and I can guide them through that process. My role in my company as Digital Abodes is to support the communication between the end user and the data center operator, so that everybody knows what they should be talking about and everyone gets the right service about them. So I advise end users as much as I'll support and work with the data center operator.
Great, and I think maybe this links us in a little bit to the skills gap. You were talking about a general gap in skills for data center engineers, and that gap, as we discussed before, is reflected in software engineering as well. So there is a general shortage of experienced engineers, and there is also a huge amount of choice as to where those engineers want to go to. So I'm just wondering if is there more of a trend of people with their own data centers, when I mean completely DIY their own, moving more into co-location. And does that give, is there a movement of engineers moving more towards the co-location providers rather than being sort of, dedicated inside a particular company, for example, the consumer?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. There's a lot of M&A activity within the data center sector at the moment. In fact, quite a lot of what I've been doing for the last 2 to 3 years is around mergers and acquisitions, and advising in some capacity around for both the seller and the buyer. In fact, can't remember what the number was, but I think it was something like there's expected to be something like £80 billion worth of M&A activity within the data center sector over the next 2 to 3 years. So what we're seeing is those organizations that operate their own data centers. And I talked about the banks earlier on about they have their own data centers. What we're seeing is those types of organizations that aren't IT companies are starting to do what's called a sale and leaseback deal with data center co-location operators. So what happens is Bank A has a data center and they're only using 20% of that space. So the data center operator comes in and says, we will buy that data center off you on the condition that you co-locate your existing infrastructure in that site. So the data center operator buys the data center, and then the bank becomes the anchor tenant or the co-location customer within that. And then the DC operator goes to the market and markets this data center as a co-location facility. That is hugely popular at the moment. And if any of your viewers do have are operating their own data centers, there's a lot of people want to talk to you guys and talk to you about how you can take operation
it's a very interesting proposition.
And I do a lot of this. I do help the end users, and I'm more than happy to talk to any of your viewers about that and help them, guide them through the process.
Cool. So if we take that as a potential, heading, that a CIO might want to move into, What is also happening around their footprint and sustainability, and could that, what I'm trying to work out is if that was something that a CIO was considering, is there also going to be potentially an improvement in their own carbon footprint? I'm assuming that they're going to be consuming less of the resource, so therefore their own usage could be reduced. So it
Well,
could also lead to an improved carbon
yeah.
reporting or footprint. I
Well,
don't know.
well, essentially, there's a number of different scope of emissions that businesses are now required to report on as part of their ESG. Um, so environment, sustainability, and governance. So I'm sure I don't need to tell anyone that, but effectively, you would be eliminating most of your IT infrastructure carbon emissions by moving it into a co-location facility, because you'll be taking it from scope 1 emissions, which is your own facility, to scope 3 emissions, because that then becomes the responsibility of the data center operator. So the data center operator will then report back to you in the ESG format that you need on that scope 3 emissions, and they take responsibility for them. Now, we'd have to understand what that would look like as a number. But if you take the bank as the example again, they could be running very highly efficient data center that they want to move out of, but in the scheme of things, they're still not reducing the carbon emissions unless they go into co-locations.
Yeah,
So there's a lot of advantages for moving into a co-location facility. And you're essentially, there's a lot of savings to be made around it, because it's a bill. It becomes an
yeah,
operating cost. It becomes a monthly bill that you
yes,
pay for a service that you get in. But then trying to operate a data center, the costs are massive. They're massive.
yes. And so Leon, I've had to kind of almost sort of I've had to deliberately try to think of the other side, because it all sounds really compelling. So when let's say you're speaking to that CIO,
Mm.
and we're looking at that, and it's just an awful lot of, from everything you've said so far, there's an awful lot of sense in moving that direction. What are the typical concerns, or there's got to be some risks or some cons that come into it, that the CIO might think, okay, I understand all of that, Leon, but I can't do it for the following reasons. What do you hear, for people resisting that sort of move? What are they worried about? What are the sort
Yeah.
of challenges? The other
So
side of the coin, as it were.
I've got a pretty good example for you. Actually, I was speaking to an organization a couple of months ago that had 3 types of infrastructure. And those 3 types of infrastructure was their day-to-day operations, everything that everyone uses in their office on a day-to-day basis. They had a manufacturing infrastructure, and then they had a design infrastructure as well. Now, the difference between the day-to-day operations and the design and manufacture was that the applications that we're using and the hardware infrastructure that was required for that, alongside the end users, the people using the PCs, were not using PCs, they were using workstations. So they were thinking, I'm going to stick my day-to-day stuff into one of the hyperscalers, and then I'm going to keep my design and manufacture as it is on my own site. And I kind of said to them, right, so let's look at what that looks like for managing that infrastructure, and see what options that you've got. What they didn't realize was that there are cloud platforms out there that can manage heavy load applications or heavy render applications. So these are things like ad and media and stuff like that can't really be virtualized, as they say, sort of, or they can't be cloud enabled because of the heavy render nature of the application. But that's not entirely true. There are some independent cloud providers that will develop their own products specifically for the customer. And what we learned by engaging with the data center, engaging with the cloud partner on behalf of the of the end user, we were able to actually bring all their infrastructure into a co-location facility that was right next to where they were. So they still had access to their data center. So I think there's this is where the data center alliance has value, and this is where digital boards has value. We come in with a vendor neutral approach to solving the business objectives and the business goals. So we're not aligned to a specific manufacturer. We're not aligned to a specific operator. What we'll do is we'll sit down with the end user and understand what they're trying to achieve, and then offer some roadmaps for them to go down. There isn't the most common thing you'll get is the legacy stuff. Really old applications that have been developed in-house, that there's no support around them externally. That is the sort of thing we just have to let them look after themselves. We could put it in there, but that's kind of the challenges that you'd have. And that would come from the infrastructure team. They would want to look after that. So there's 1,000 different reasons that a CIO might not want to come into a co-location operator. But I think engaging with the DCA and myself to talk through what those reasons might be, I think it will be very enlightening to them to see what options are available to them, because they probably don't know that those options are available.
Yes.
And we can help them with it.
And is there an option, Leon, where there's recognized legacy kit, but you can still go ahead with the majority? It's just that you've got a special arrangement with that legacy kit, or does the legacy kit kind of just say no? You just that's going to stop everything moving across. Just trying to work out It
really depends on the business.
I mean, I suppose depends, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really depends. I spoke to a pharmaceutical company a couple of years ago who had this legacy application for one of the drugs that they manufacture. And it was developed in-house by a guy who's the only person that knows how it works. And unfortunately, the guy passed away and he developed this application 40 years ago. So no one knows how to use this, and now they're having to go back and reverse engineer everything that they've done to make the application usable in today's infrastructure. So that's an extreme example, but it is an example of what might be
refactoring. Yeah, I've been involved in really big refactoring programs, and it is, when you first look at it, you think, oh, this is actually quite scary. Okay, well, just a couple of other questions for you. First one is, if you do go down that route, what's the transition project like? Is it a really big deal? Everyone's worried, huge teams, or is it a sort of a paper exercise where you're cutting the ribbon, and actually nothing physically changes from day one? It's just whoever's signing the electricity bill changes. Well, what's the sort of transition effort required? Is it
in the case of a sale and lease back, it's not too complicated. The DC operator will probably come in and assess the site to look for better efficiencies, etc. But that's not too complicated. But if you're an IT department that's now thinking of moving 5 or 10 racks into a co-location facility from your own building, this is a digital transformation program. And you need the right kind of guidance and partner to do that. So the data center operators, there's plenty of them around. You can approach them in any way, or I can do it on their behalf. But the migration of data and the physical migration of the equipment is a digital transformation program. And then putting the cloud platform on top so that they can access that. It is an undertaking.
Absolutely.
A big undertaking. But there are, there are organizations that are looking at 100 to 200 to 300 racks. And that becomes a massive project, but it's great fun. I do like them ones.
Yeah, I was, I encountered something called a petabyte in 2004, I think it was, and sort of blew my mind a bit. They said, if you want to get an idea of how big a petabyte is, John, you can't. It's just too big for a human to think about. But if you were able to, it'd be roughly the size of all the stars in a galaxy. So I was like, okay, yeah, you're right. I can't imagine that. And so we were talking about 4 petabytes in that instance. Now, fast forward to current days, petabytes are actually pretty common, and in the really big folks, I think they're called zettabytes, which isn't even in the Greek. It's not even the right. It's just made up. It's like gazillion. It's a we're just having to come up with these new terms because of the size of data. But the reason why I was mentioning it, Leon, is you're talking about that transformation, the transition. Sometimes people say, actually, John, we need to just stick this in a van and move it, because to move all this data over the network, with the current infrastructure, by our calculations, is going to take 5 years, 2 months, and 20 days. And people don't realize that's the sort of, I mean, everyone's taken ages on their PC, haven't they, to download something? It's really that, isn't it? But on a massive scale. And you were talking about the sustainability footprint of streaming. So actually, there are some sort of, you might say, well, that's a bit crazy. Why would you put everything in a van? And I know there's a lot of risk with that as well, because as it's trundling down the motorway, the crown jewels are in there, aren't they? It'll be
but there are,
recovery will take forever. Go on, sorry, dear.
There are specialist organizations that cater for this, and they only do physical data center moves, and it is a very well planned out process in how they do that. But you said there's always going to be challenges around. Well, let me put it a different way. I think that most people think that the most stressful thing they ever go through is moving house. And that's essentially what you're doing. That's what you're doing with your infrastructure. So you've got to plan it well. You've got to make sure there's no downtime for your business whilst you're doing it. And what a lot of organizations tend to do, and it's a smart thing to do, is they upgrade their hardware at the same time. So instead of shifting all the servers in the rack into the data center, what they do is they do a migration of the data onto the new hardware as it's already installed in the data center. But the larger the requirement, or the larger number of servers or data that you're doing, the more difficult that becomes.
Yes, and then there's always a bit of kit that no one's ever switched off that somehow has managed to be up. Stay up because of uninterruptible power, and no one quite knows. Everyone looks at it and goes, actually, that just looks like a really old operating system. I'm not sure whether that would come up, or even better, when it does come up, there'll be a password, a boot password or something awful like that. I mean, there's literally every scenario you can face. So, Leon, this is absolutely fascinating, and I think there's some really big things in this topic that you do very well to speak to someone like yourself. Because it's not obvious, and also there's a number of approaches that you've shared with us that folks can take to not only improve sustainability, but affect their own bottom line, and save themselves money, and also reduce their impact on the planet in terms of impact. So I was just mindful of time. We got that you talked earlier about a dream that you've got. Before we get to there, was there any other sort of key areas that you would want to impart with the folks listening to this before we get into your vision? Because I think it would be really good to finish off on the vision. But before we get that, is there any other areas you'd like to cover?
There is. I mean, on the sale and leaseback topic, for those that operate their own data centers, one thing I want to make sure that they understand is that data center operator that comes in and buys that data center will want to take the staff with them. So I just want to make sure that becomes a real big concern to those that are selling, because they're wondering, do we have to make the staff redundant? How does that work? What does it look like? But most of these all of the data center operators will pay those staff over. And I just want to make that clear. That shouldn't be something that concerns you. It actually works quite well for both.
in your experience, when getting back to the skills shortage,
Mm.
folks that do 2P across, do you find that they're in an environment where now their expertise is the core expertise of the business they've joined? I'm trying to work out, do people see that as a positive in the main? Because
Yeah.
everyone can get very concerned about, well, hang on a minute, this isn't the company I joined, and what's this going to be like? But what's your experience in terms of how engineers feel at the end of that process generally?
Yeah. So they're all what they're actually doing is they're joining a team of other engineers with the expertise that they've got. So they're joining a larger community which they can learn from. So there's a good mix as they come together, because the data center that was bought over here probably does something different from the data center that they've just bought from yourself that you look after. But one thing that is absolutely critical during that acquisition process is that the staff that are on that site that you've just acquired know it inside out. They know every crack, they know every door, they know everything about that site. So they've got invaluable information that will help the operator improve the sites, and they have ideas of their own, which is great. And they'll say, well, they may say, we think we need to improve the shape of this room so that we can get more efficiency out of it, and we've come up with a construction cost, and this is what we think we would do, and this is how we think it will benefit the organization, because they know the site inside out. So if you are buying a data center as a data center operator, you really are looking at those, keeping those staff on in any way you can.
Cool. And then on to the dream.
Onto the dream, yeah.
Just before you kind of articulate it, I think it's great. I don't think it's a dream at all. I think it's a really, really solid vision. But the first thing I wanted to ask, you're going to talk about decentralization. If we took a picture of the UK right now, and we kind of looked at data centers and where power is there a big regional difference? And I'm making this up because I don't know what the map looks like, but if I'm consuming streaming services in the north of England, am I being served mainly from the south, and is the power coming from, how skewed is it at the moment, or centralized is it at the moment?
So we're all used to the big coal powered buildings that kind of just provided us power for many, many years. That's just the way that it is. But the further away you are from that source of the power, the less efficient the power is. So you're losing its efficiency the further you are away. Now, I'm not an expert in this particular area of it, but what I'd like to see is smaller regional power sources, preferably renewable, supporting the areas that they're located in. And we talked about the nuclear fusion, obviously many, many years away. But that's kind of one of the things that I would support, having 6, 7, 8 strategically placed nuclear fusion power plants that will deliver the power to the country, to all businesses on all homes in the most efficient manner. I think data centers and power companies, this is my dream, or should I say, or this is what I'd like to see. I'd like to see big business, big power companies collaborate with data centers on developing what you might call a power hub, if you like, and co-investing with the data center operators to design and build what I would like to call edge infrastructure. And that edge infrastructure doesn't just include compute, it includes power. And it includes resources that, as humans, we are constantly consuming, but make it as clean and efficient as they possibly can. So if I wanted to build a data center in the town that I live in right now, I would, where there is no data centers, I'm 25 miles north of Manchester, where there's quite a lot of data centers. But if I wanted to build one here in East Lancashire. I'd like to be able to go to a power company and say, we're building a data center here. We want you to build a renewable power hub alongside it. We will act as the anchor tenant to justify your investment, and you can then go and sell your product to the region as you would normally sell it. That's what I would like to see, but with renewables. That's my dream.
And the folks that are listening, the folks that are going to be potentially consuming this sort of decentralized structure, if people are watching this and they're nodding and going, actually, that sounds like a really good thing, is there anything they can do to support you? Is there a lobbying? Is there any? What's the how do we get there beyond it being a dream? Is this the sort of stuff that you guys do? Do you lobby already? I'm just
Yeah,
trying to work out whether there's any call to action we can suggest to folks who might want to support that vision.
Yeah, we lobby. The Data Center Alliance lobbies government. We are actually very, considering, for many years the government wouldn't take our calls. And then the pandemic happened and they kind of all realized, oh, hold on a minute, this data center stuff, it's pretty important, isn't it? We're all on Zoom calls, and they designate it critical infrastructure. So the Department for Culture, Media and Sport, for some reason, we are part of that. They now actually regularly attend and gather information from the Data Center Alliance on shaping digital infrastructure of the future. So we do talk to them about that. I think we've got the data center industry is not very good at helping people understand what we do. I think we need to speak more to the power companies. We need to talk to them about, this co-investment, this joint venture, this let's work together kind of approach, because it's quite hard to get investment in data centers anyway. And it would make sense that these cash-rich power companies should invest in this infrastructure that will help them deliver their products.
They've potentially got the balance sheet to
Oh,
do
yes.
this, and then there's a great kind of benefit, and there is also a commercial benefit. So
Yes.
yeah, we just got to get the stars to line up, Leon.
Yes.
So can I just say, from my point of view, Leon, it's been really interesting. There's been some elements of what we've discussed today I just would never have thought of until you kind of shone the light in a different direction. I think we all consume utilities, and there is such a habit of just turning the tap on and filling up a glass of water and closing the tap and just not even thinking just how incredible just that is.
Yeah.
And then something that is arguably even more amazing is the sort of the moving pictures that we get on our TV, on our computer screens, and everything that goes through that, but also the impact of it. So, is there any other things that you would call out to the folks that are listening out of everything that we've discussed? If someone's very interested in increasing the sustainable nature of their digital infrastructure, what should they do? Tomorrow morning after they've listened to this.
Well, they can certainly contact myself directly, and I represent the Data Center Alliance and specifically the Special Interest Group for Co-location. But within the Data Center Alliance, we have so much experience, resources, and knowledge with us that there isn't anything that we can't really answer, because as a trade association, we share and we talk to each other. So I may have a conversation with the CIO tomorrow that's talking about compliance in a certain area of the data center, which I'm not qualified to talk about. But I know I've got a colleague within the DCA that I can put in front of that CIO that will give them the right, relevant, and important documentation and information that they need. And I think whilst we're a non-profit organization at the DCA, so we rely on memberships to keep us going, but that doesn't mean we don't accept those that wouldn't want to be a member because it's just not really their thing. But we would be prepared to help and advise them, because our goal is to better inform, one of our goals is to better inform the world of what we are, what we do, and how we want to get better at it.
Brilliant. Well, I hope this video will help in that sense as well,
Yeah, me too.
because it's obviously, once it's published, and I hope that most of the people who stream it aren't too far away from their data center and their local power source. But if they're not, that's the thought process we want to kick off. So, massive thank you. I really appreciate it, and I think obviously folks who have listened to this episode or are watching it, or both, we'll put in all the relevant links, Leon, in the descriptions, and we'll make sure that we can get folks across and put them in touch with you should they want to do that. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today. It gives a great opportunity for the industry to wave to the world and say, look, we're here to help, and we're trying to do our best for you, and you just only need to ask us, and we'll help you.
Excellent. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much.